So, Karol, thank you for joining me today. You're a forestry consultant and woodland creator with Plant One Cornwall, a community interest company dedicated to planting native woodlands, restoring habitats, and engaging businesses, landowners, and communities across Cornwall. I'm Karol Kaczmarek, the co-founder of Net Zero Compare, and our audience wants to understand how grassroots woodland creation can scale and deliver both climate and biodiversity benefits while remaining financially and ecologically sustainable.
Yeah, well, yeah, nice to meet you, and a great question, really. I mean, something unique happened after COVID. I think there was a shift in the mindset of businesses where the businesses really started to understand the power of sustainability and how important it was to get behind a sustainability momentum and movement and start supporting conservation efforts. So there's a real kind of energy and momentum behind this, and businesses are understanding their role within this whole kind of momentum that's going on. So yeah, we work with a lot of businesses that isn't just about box ticking. They understand essentially that their business has a role in using their business as an economic force for good. So not just about generating profit, but about generating prosperity, and that means boosting biodiversity. That means investing in projects that sequester carbon and investing in social good as well.
And how did you get involved in forestry and woodland creation?
Yeah, I mean, I've always been absolutely mad about trees and woods. I was fortunate enough to live at the bottom of a really nice woodland, and I grew up on a farm, and I didn't have many neighbours, but what I did have was this amazing woodland that me and my brother used to just spend all our summers in, and building dens and rope swings. So I've always had this love of trees and woodlands, and I was fortunate enough to put that into a career in my early 20s, and I became a tree surgeon, an arborist. So I started to really understand the biomechanics behind trees and how fantastic these magnificent creatures are. So when I got into my 30s, I started getting a little bit depressed about the kind of pressures we were facing as a community and globally. And I sort of thought, well, what's my role in this? What can I do to kind of help push back against climate change? So having this love of trees and then this understanding of trees from my career, creating woodlands was quite an obvious choice. But it was coupled with the fact that the UK is the most heavily deforested country in Europe, and Cornwall, down here in the southwest, is the most heavily deforested county in the whole of the UK. So it's really important that we restore these woodland habitats.
That's a great foundation, 100%. Let's talk about where it's heading at the moment. So scaling and planting metrics. What scale are you aiming for, let's say, in the next 3-5 years in terms of trees planted, hectares restored, and canopy cover?
Yeah, absolutely. So when I first started out with Plant One, I just wanted to plant as many trees as possible. I wanted to just get out there and kind of really do as much as I could. But I quickly learned that we needed to have an attainable goal for us to work towards, for our team to work towards, and our supporters to buy in. So we've got a quite a modest aim to restore 3,000 hectares of woodland across Cornwall. Now, Cornwall has a 10% canopy cover. So what we're looking at doing in Plant One is boosting that 10% by a further 10%. So we've worked out that it's 3,000 hectares, and our aim is to restore 3,000 hectares of woodland over the next 25 years, so until 2050. And we're about 15% of the way there at the moment. So we started in 2019, and we've been pretty much scaling and doubling in size. We want to get to the point where we're establishing about 100,000 trees a year, and then that's going to help us get to that 3,000 hectare mark by the time I retire. So that's where we're at. Yeah, so 3,000 hectares the next 25 years, and going from about 60, 70,000 trees that we're planting at the moment per year to about 100, 120,000.
I wouldn't say it's modest. It gives us a sense of ambition, to be honest.
Well, yeah, I just amazing when you speak to, foresters from places like Canada and
Oh,
Norway planting, masses of those in almost 1 year. But yeah, I think the kind of woodland habitats that we're looking to create are very different than forestry, and it's about biodiversity. So intrinsically, they're a lot less densely packed as well. So it's a more involved process.
and how do you decide which sites to plant and which native species best fit local conditions, for instance?
Yeah, I mean, we've got a fantastic opportunity down here in Cornwall. So it's referred to as hyperoceanic. So basically, what that means is we get a lot of rainfall and we get temperate conditions. Temperate. It's never too hot, never too cold. It sits in this like nice temperate region, which gives way to what we understand now as temperate rainforests. These are Celtic rainforests, and they're dominated by the sessile oak, which is the Celtic oak. So we're creating Atlantic oak woodlands, and these would have been here right the way from Cornwall up to Scotland along the western fringe of the UK. And it's because of our relationship with the Atlantic that these exist. So that's the kind of woodlands that we're looking to create. Obviously, these take hundreds of years to mature into these temperate rainforests, but we need to start getting the trees in the ground now and start marking out the land to become this woodland again.
Perfect. Thank you very much for the insight. And how do you weigh carbon sequestration goals against biodiversity restoration and co-benefits like soil or water health?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, the key thing for us going forward is we want to make sure that biodiversity and carbon go hand in hand. We can't end up with a low carbon, low biodiverse world. It has to be a low carbon and high biodiversity world. So for us, that means planting and establishing the right habitats, because we want to make sure that as we move into the next century, the trees that we have planted will host the flora and fauna that habitat these woodlands. Because if we only plant for carbon, then we are going to lose species as we move into the next century. So for us, we always look at a woodland when it comes to sequestering carbon, brilliant, but also what does that mean for biodiversity? But as our woodlands mature, temperate rainforests are some of the best carbon sinks that you can have in this country. So yeah, we look at trees that are going to grow quickly. Alder's a fantastic opportunity of this, pulling carbon down, fixing nitrogen into the soil. But also, as these woodlands mature and they host a whole lush biodiversity, that will also act as a carbon sink.
And what about the long-term survival and curve? So once trees are planted, how do you ensure high survival rates and establish healthy woodlands over time?
Yeah. So we've got an 86% survival rate across our sites. Now, the way that we ensure longevity and ensure that our initial planting become woodlands is that we have a minimum requirement to work with on those woodlands. So we have a minimum of 5 years in which we work on those woodlands. So we don't just stick the trees in the ground and then walk away. We want to be there every month, coming back, checking on the trees, reading the trees, and ensuring that they're growing to maturity. Some of our sites, we've got contracts for about 15 years. We think that's kind of the maximum, and it probably sits somewhere in between 5 to 15 years. If we can help establish those woodlands in those early years, I think after 15 years, we can successfully say, yeah, that is now a burgeoning juvenile woodland.
That's great. And as you know, practical maintenance is very often overlooked, unfortunately.
Yeah,
Uh,
and that really matters, because then you start getting the natural regeneration coming through, and you start getting the biodiversity. But you need to manage that land for that to happen.
Exactly. Let's talk right now about carbon finance and credits. Do you work with any carbon markets such as the Woodland Carbon Code, and how does that fit into your funding model?
Yeah, I mean, we work within the kind of voluntary carbon market when it comes to our businesses. We are developing a carbon project at the moment, so it's going to be one of our first ones where we're going to be working with the Woodland Carbon Code. So one of the kind of obstacles we've come across is we don't own the land. We're working with land partners, so it's been a little bit hard to kind of get across that. But we successfully worked with one over in Bodmin where we shaped up the site, planted the site, and then handed everything over to the landowner, and they've now been successfully selling credits off that site. So that's been a fantastic win for that. And we're looking at developing our first carbon site where we will be uh, accessing the credits to sell to market.
Interesting. Financing mechanisms, as we know, really affect the scale.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think it's a brilliant opportunity at the moment, and we are seeing quite big price fluctuations within the carbon market when it comes to the Woodland Carbon Code stuff. So there's a really good opportunity to maximize on creating a revenue from woodland creation sites at the moment.
And what kind of partnerships make woodland creation work? For example, land access, funding, or volunteer planting days? Because these are the three I found out online.
Yeah. I mean, like for us, one of the most important things that we say when we're working with a land partner is what is the public access going to be on the site? The work that we do can't happen behind closed gates. This has to involve everybody. People have to have a role in conservation and their locality. It's really important to us. So we look for land partners that have public footpaths. If they've got public footpaths, brilliant. If they don't have public footpaths, are they willing to work with us so we can bring volunteers on and do community days? If so, that's great. But if they don't have public footpaths, or if they're not going to work with us when it comes to bringing the public on, then that's not going to work for us. So it's really essential that our land partners open the gates and let the public in.
A lot of people also emphasize the importance of community engagement. How do you involve local communities, schools, and maybe volunteers? And what benefits do they see beyond carbon?
Yeah, absolutely. So, I mean, it kind of goes back to that point about the landowner. We want to have public access on that, but then we also run a series of volunteer days throughout the year. And some of the most subscribed volunteer days that we run are the tree planting days. And we work with schools, we work with universities, we work with businesses. And it's always amazing to see the people come along who are reluctant to come along. Either they've been dragged along by their parents, or they've been made to go by their teachers, or their husband have dragged them along. And then we set out the day, and we have a cup of tea, a biscuit, and we talk about the trees we're going to plant and why we're going to plant it and why it's important. Guaranteed by the end of the day they're absolutely loving it, and they're like, yeah, we planted 50 trees. It's been fantastic. There's something really there's I think we've got a real deep connection when it comes to kind of planting trees. We've kind of lived within these kind of habitats for thousands of years, so that simple act, planting a tree and stepping back and imagining what that's going to become, really resonates with people. Even if they don't think they're going to enjoy it, they really enjoy it by the end of the day.
That's excellent. And now something people don't like talk about that much, so policy and regulation. So what policies or regulations help or hinder woodland creation in Cornwall or the UK as a whole?
Yeah, absolutely. So the government the previous government identified that we need to establish, so we need to go from 13% woodland cover in the UK to 19% by 2050. So they're looking at increasing canopy cover by 6% across the UK to meet their carbon and biodiversity needs of the country. So yeah, and they've ring fenced some money to make this happen, and that's brilliant. The Forestry Commission have woodland creation grants for landowners. So there's a pot of money that landowners can access. The problem is, and this is where the grants work against us and actually become a barrier to entry, is all of that work has to be front loaded by the landowner. So they have to pay for this, the woodland creation plan, the environmental impact assessment. They have to bring on a contractor to plant the trees. They have to pay for the trees. And when you're talking over 10, 20, 30, 40 hectares, this cost easily ramps up into the tens, if not hundreds of thousands. And then the landowner only gets reimbursed once the site's been signed off. And that can be somewhere between 6 to 18 months. So although the government has put aside these great targets, unfortunately, the nation is falling way short on its woodland creation goals. I mean, way short. I think we're operating around 35% of their goals at the moment, and it's because these grants that they put out aren't fit for purpose. So one of the things that Plant One does is we front load and we bridge loan the grant. That's one way that we work with landowners. We say, right, we will cover all of the costs. We'll put together the application for the grant, and then when you get paid, we get paid. So that's one way that we work with landowners to super boost woodland creation.
That's good to know. So we have 25 years left. And as we know, policy often decides the pace of change. And what about the future vision? What's your vision for Plant One Cornwall and your forestry work in the next, let's say, decade?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, we're looking to establish that 3,000 hectares. Another goal of ours is to make woodlands culturally significant again. So it's about getting people out into the woods and showing them the fantastic woodlands that we've got here. But also what I'm really interested in is laying the groundwork for a future forestry industry here in Cornwall. Yes, let's plant native species, but let's make sure that these woodlands are planted in such a way that in the future they can become an economic resource as well. Woodlands need management, so that means removing some trees. And if these trees are economically viable and good timber products, then what we're doing is we're taking trees once they reach maturity out of a woodland to benefit the woodland. But also, when you make products out of trees, you lock carbon up, and that's kind of the end product of the carbon cycle. Yes, trees sequester carbon, but what happens to that tree when it falls over? Well, let's use that into a building material, and then it locks that carbon up for another 100 to 300 years, you know? So yeah, I'm really excited about working with that long-term strategy in mind of saying, wouldn't it be great in 100 years time that there's a fantastic forestry industry back in Cornwall? Because the UK, you would have had an amazing forestry industry, but the UK is the second biggest importer of timber in the world, second only to China, which is mental. We're a forest island. We should have an amazing timber industry.
Yep, that's clear. And that gives us a roadmap for what to watch. And before we wrap up, is there anything we haven't touched on that you'd like to add? Perhaps an advice for others wanting to support or replicate your work?
Yeah, I mean, get in touch with Plant One. Always happy to advise and consult and support people that are looking to do similar work. Or if you're looking to support an organization like us, get in touch, because we need all the help that we can get. And it's not just about the finance side. Obviously, it takes money to do the work that we do, but also if you feel that you could add value to the work that we're doing in some other capacity, brilliant. And my final point would be, go visit a woodland this weekend. So get out in the woods. Yeah.
Thank you so much. That rounds out the picture pretty nicely. Karol, thank you for sharing your insights. We will publish highlights on Net Zero Compare so our audience can see how grassroots woodland creation in Cornwall is shaping both climate action and biodiversity restoration. Thank you so much.
Brilliant.